Hello, class. I wanted to take a couple minutes here at the beginning of the week and talk about some of the material that we will be going over this week. This chapter discusses free will in a number of different ways. One of the ways that free will establishes itself is in the form of discretion that police officers have to enforce certain laws or to give some leeway on certain laws. So we're going to touch on that just a little bit. We're also going to talk about Jeremy Bentham again. That's a common theme. Bentham being one of the forefathers in the philosophy of rational choice and free will is going to come up a lot in this discussion of ethics and morality as we go through the semester. Remember, we talked about Bentham's rational choice theory is essentially people will always decide to seek pleasure and avoid pain. That cost-benefit analysis is what rational choice is. And it applies to free will also. Everybody has free will. Doesn't matter if you're an offender, a criminal, or if you're an enforcer, the police. So offenders and enforcers both have free will to act as they see fit. Doesn't mean there aren't repercussions from your decisions to be made, but the decisions are individual decisions to be made. And everybody has the free will to make those decisions. How does that apply to, we'll talk about offenders first. How does that apply to offenders? Offenders have just what we talked about, that cost-benefit analysis of deciding whether or not to commit a crime. They will weigh the benefits of the crime against the cost of getting caught, the cost of punishment. So what are some of the benefits of crime? I mean, if you're the offender, there's got to be a reason why you would choose to risk being punished. The benefit could be financial in a theft or a financial crime, a white collar crime, insider trading, things like that, where there is that financial gain to be had, and you weigh that out. Well, what's my risk of getting caught, and how much can I make? Instant gratification can come into play there, but essentially offenders have the free will to choose, do I want to gain this financial amount, or do I want to gain in the sense that I don't have to go to prison? So it's a cost and a benefit analysis, and offenders make that every time they choose. Other reasons why offenders may choose to break the law could be social reasons. If you're a member or a potential member of a criminal street gang and there's an opportunity to move up the ranks or gain respect or clout by engaging in certain criminal behaviors, then that is a benefit. It's not a financial benefit per se, but there is a social benefit to be had there. There could be a psychological benefit in assaults, fights. It may feel good to bully and fight somebody, to harm them, because you felt disrespected, or just because it in someone's mind, it feels good to hurt others. That cost benefit when it comes to causing physical pain to others and making themselves feel good is weighed against the penalty of getting caught. So there's all kinds of motivations for becoming an offender that you weigh against the cost of getting caught and being penalized, either through fines, incarceration, imprisonment, things like that. But again, the offender has to weigh those out. Changing gears a little bit to enforcers. What are some of the cost and benefit decisions that enforcers, when they have the discretion or the free will to enforce a law? Not every crime has to be prosecuted to the full extent. Not every infraction needs to be acted on by the police. How do police, what decisions do police have when they're going to engage in discretion? You can go on one extreme. If a police officer witnesses a murder, do they have the discretion not to act? And then compare that to if a police officer is on the way to a serious radio call. Maybe they're on the way to a murder investigation and they see somebody roll through a stop sign. Do they have the discretion to ignore that minor crime in lieu of more major investigations? Sure. You could take that away. You could take away the murder investigation aspect of that. Does every traffic violation need to be acted upon every time a police officer sees it? Or do they have the discretion to to let some stuff go. Going further, if you, as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, decide to engage in a traffic stop because you saw a minor violation, do you need to issue a citation? Can you issue a warning? Can you give a verbal warning? The cost and the benefit in those scenarios. So what is the benefit in enforcing the law? The benefit is hopefully you will discourage that law from being broken in the future. Or you will protect members of society. Remember we talked about last week, we talked about either discouraging people from breaking the law in the future or protecting society from those who would break the law. So in the case of the murder, if you arrest that person, hopefully you would protect society from future criminal activity. What about the minor traffic violations? Can that same thing be accomplished, that same goal be accomplished with a warning? Perhaps just merely by being pulled over, you get somebody's mind right and they think twice before they speed again or before they roll through a stop sign, things like that. Not everything has to be always involving the most serious punishment possible. There's increasing levels of punishment that can be incorporated into the discretionary decisions of police officers and law enforcement officers in general. Other things that the enforcers may take into consideration when we're doing cost benefit. What about, we talked about the other calls that need to be handled. You have to prioritize your work list for the day. What about the relationship with the community? Does every contact with the community, every traffic stop within a community need to result in a citation if that's going to bring ill will towards the department, towards the organization? Can you balance, is there a balance between enforcing the law or protecting the community, but also not having this adversarial relationship where it's us versus them that sometimes high ticket writing campaigns can cause? And then there's personal decisions that officers make. A lot of citizen complaints can come from negative contacts with traffic stops or with citizens in general. And there are times when officers, if they have too many or they're trying to avoid complaints, and I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but this does come into play. Sometimes officers will avoid public contacts, avoid traffic stops and enforcing minor infractions because they are trying to avoid racking up another citizen complaint. It's unfortunate that it occurs, but it's a hard reality. Not every crime allows for discretion. We talked about murder versus traffic stops. Obviously, one you can have discretion, one you can't. But legislatively, discretion is taken out of the hands a lot of times of police officers. Domestic violence is a good example of that. You can have a misdemeanor domestic violence, but if the state legislature says this is a mandatory arrest, then regardless of the seriousness of the injury, the officer's actions are predetermined by the law. And if a crime has been committed in those situations and it's a mandatory arrest situation, then that officer shall make that arrest. So there is no discretion. There's some other laws, but domestic violence is one of the most common that has what we call shall arrest or mandatory arrest policies. What about, how does free will and entrapment go together? What is entrapment? You hear that tossed around a lot, especially previously, and I've let you guys know that I worked a long time in undercover assignments, and you hear the word entrapment thrown around a lot during undercover investigations at the conclusion. Like, well, they entrapped me. What is that? One of the most easy, the most simple definitions of that, while the legal definition can get a lot more complicated, one of the easiest definitions is if somebody was encouraged to commit a crime that they weren't going to commit on their own, then that's entrapment. Again, that's not the legal definition, but that's a colloquial street definition. So in undercover work, or in any assignment, but in my situation, if we found somebody who wasn't going to break the law and we talked him into doing it, that's entrapment. So all the other investigations, the undercover investigations that we engaged in, needed to make sure that the subject of our investigation was already going to break the law when we used the undercover investigation to gather further evidence. So if there is a human trafficking suspect, that person needed to already have been engaged or needed to make an initial contact or seek out an undercover operator, not knowing that they were the police, and try to engage them in criminal activity, as opposed to the other way around. Or if we were dealing with underground organized crime casinos, that casino needs to already have been in place when the undercover operators infiltrate. Otherwise, that way you're showing that the crime was already in progress. There was nobody being talked into doing something they wouldn't have done normally. So you're showing they had the free will. They had, as an offender, they had the decision to either commit the crime or not commit the crime. And before they were under investigation, they had already begun some of that criminal activity, as opposed to entrapment, where an undercover operator will encourage them, talk them into committing a crime they wouldn't have normally committed. Granted, there's a fine line between did they have the free will to say no, but there's not a fine line when it comes to the definition of entrapment, and you've talked them into doing something they wouldn't have done, takes away some of that criminal liability. So interesting way you can apply free will and offender discretion to real world investigations. That's going to wrap it up for today's discussion. Like I said in the housekeeping video, I do look forward to your discussions this week, your discussion posts on officer discretion. We're going to pose the question more along the lines of enforcement discretion versus offender free will. And I want to hear what you guys have to say from your experiences, or some of this talk, or from the book or outside resources, about what you think when and what occasions officers can have discretion to enforce certain laws versus other laws. Again, if you have any questions, please give me a call, check your emails, and if I've asked you to give me a call, then do that as well. All right, take care.